All right, so here we are still in chapter 7, and I think I'm going to do, I don't think it'll take too long. So this is going to be part B and C, okay? So part A is in a separate video, and so let's take a look and see what parts B and C ask for. All right, part B is pretty short. Okay, so part B asks us to compute the amount of dividend income reported by Lugnut this year as a result of the distributions. Okay, so Lugnut is getting some distributions from this company, and we need to calculate the amount of dividend. Okay, so first, what do we have to remember? Well, we have to remember what our earnings and profits situation is. So if we remember from part A, current earnings and profits at the end of the year, was well over $1.5 million accumulated. E&P, where was our accumulated amount? Here's our accumulated amount. And it's important to note that this was the beginning of the year, okay? And the reason I'm putting that there, even though it's the beginning of the year, we can see that current E&P was positive. And if we look at our distributions, okay, our distributions are not enormous relative to our current earnings and profits. All right, so let's take a look at what we have distribution-wise, okay? So during the year, we have the following distributions, okay? $50,000 cash, all right? And then we have some land with a fair market value of $75,000. The company's tax basis was $10,000, all right? And we know that Lugnut also assumed a mortgage of $15,000, all right? So let's look at remember that distributions are considered dividends to the extent, most simply, that they do not exceed current earnings and profits if current earnings and profits are positive, okay? And in this situation, current earnings and profits are positive, all right? So what is the first thing we would have? Well, this $50,000 of cash is the easiest thing to deal with, right? And so that is absolutely treated as a dividend, okay? All right, now we have to deal with the non-cash property. Okay, and so what is his amount of the distribution? Well, remember, we have to look at the fair market value of what he receives minus any liabilities assumed. Okay, and so if we recall, fair market value is $75,000, existing mortgage is $15,000. Okay, so we just do the arithmetic there. And so the value of non-cash property is $60,000. So total value of distribution to Lugnut is $110,000. It's just that $50,000 cash plus that $60,000 of non-cash property value. All right. This is much less than current earnings and profits. So what of that is taxed as a dividend? The entire $110,000. Okay, so that is part B. All right, now let's go to the next slide, since that didn't take very long, and let's talk about part C. Back and grab that, and where is that? There it is, $2.4 million. And then this is the answer to part B. All right, and that completes this big Chapter 7 comprehensive problem. All right, because part C is stuck back here at the very back here. Okay, so what is part C asking us for? We need to figure out their accumulated earnings and profits at the beginning of next year. Okay, so we have to figure out their earnings and profits at the beginning of next year. Well, so what would be our starting point with that? Well, our starting point with that needs to be our current E&P from this year. All right, and so we have to look at part A to recall what our current earnings and profits were, and we just dealt with that for part B too. So our current earnings and profits. Okay, now what reduces current earnings and profits? Well, what reduces current earning and profits are distributions, right? Because this earning and profits has already been an adjustment. We've already adjusted from taxable income to earnings and profits. So now we have to adjust for our cash dividend. All right. And we have to adjust for our property. But what does it come out at? What does the property come out at? Remember, property comes out at fair market value. All right, now you might be asking yourself, what about the mortgage? We're going to deal with the mortgage, okay? So these are our two subtractions from current earnings and profits. Remember, we're working our way down to accumulated earnings and profits at the beginning of next year, okay? So we've subtracted out our property values from our distributions. Now what do we add? Well, now we add the value of that mortgage, because what happened? Well, when Lugnut assumes that mortgage, that's an economic benefit to the corporation. So we get to add that back. Okay, so that's that $15,000 mortgage. Okay, so what does all of this tell us? Well, we started with current earnings and profits, and we made our adjustments to current earnings and profits based on the distributions to our shareholders. Okay, so that is going to give us current earnings and profits after distribution. All right, now obviously, if we didn't make any distributions, if the corporation had not distributed cash and property to a shareholder, then we wouldn't have to worry about this line, okay? But we did, so we do our arithmetic here, and I believe we get to $1,406,000. Okay. Now, that's our current earnings and profits after our distribution. All right, we're trying to get to accumulated earnings and profits at the beginning of the year. So what do? Well, we just add our previous balance to our current balance. And that gets us to the beginning of next year. Okay, so accumulated earnings and profits, beginning of year. And let's go back. Okay. And then that gets us to accumulated earnings and profits at the beginning of next year. So add those up and we get 3,806,000. Oops, that should be, whoops. Gotta remember to switch my pen back. That should be a 4. All right, I apologize for that. Right? Yeah, because there's a 4 up there. Okay? And so this is the answer to part C.